Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ali Canayanlar. Turkey's strategic location, sandwiched between Europe and Asia, has made it a natural corridor for both the flow of people and goods and services. The country is also on the doorstep of some of the world's most lucrative energy reserves, making it an ideal hub. And that's what Russia and Turkey are hoping to achieve with the Turkstream pipeline, which is currently under construction. The multi-billion-dollar project will bring Russian natural gas under the Black Sea, through Turkey, and then onto Europe. Our Amidst explains what the pipeline could mean for Turkey's energy needs and its ambitions to become a vital energy hub.
The Turkstream is a 930-kilometer-long gas pipeline that will link Russia and Turkey. It will have a capacity of transporting up to 31.5 billion cubic meters of natural gas a year. The first section of the pipeline will supply 1/3 of Turkey's energy requirements. And the second section, with connecting pipelines from Turkey to southern Europe, will mean that Turkey will be central to the transportation of Russian gas to Europe and potentially earn billions of dollars in the process. The Turkstream pipeline is set to become online by the end of this year. Billions of cubic meters of natural gas from Russia will pass under the Black Sea before making its way to Turkey. With the bypassing of Ukraine, the traditional route for Russian energy is Turkey, set to become the region's new energy hub. When it opens, the pipeline will allow Russian energy giant Gazprom to meet the increased gas demand from Turkey, which already is its second biggest national client after Germany, as well as meeting the country's domestic natural gas needs. Turkstream will make Turkey a gas bridge between the east and west. But some European countries were critical of Russia's strategy in building new pipelines like the Turkstream, accusing the Kremlin of trying to exert political influence in Europe. This led the European Commission to call on the industry to diversify sources, suppliers, and routes of supply. Volkan Idigar served as the chief energy advisor to 3 Turkish presidents between 1998 and 2010, and he is an expert on energy security in the Middle East and Europe.
This is a geopolitical issue. So there's a big fight over resources between the United States, which is promoting the unconventional gas in the form of LNG. Russia is the king of the conventional gas, so they don't want to lose their customers. And European Union is in the middle, and they have a long tradition of buying gas from Russia.
US exports of LNG to the EU have increased almost 3 times since the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, and US President Donald Trump have agreed to strengthen energy cooperation earlier this year. However, Russia still remains the dominant supplier of natural gas to Europe, a position that will be strengthened once the Turkstream pipeline becomes fully operational, which will also bring lucrative opportunities to Turkey. Ahmad Kablan, Straight Talk.
So, is Turkey's ambitions to become a major energy hub set to be a reality? Are there any risks involved? To answer that, I'm joined by Matthew Briza, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and Filiz Katman, who is a professor of international relations at Aydın University and the director of the Energy Politics and Market Supplied Research Center here in Istanbul. Welcome to both of you. Good to have you on the show. Filiz, let me start with you. Besides the obvious monetary benefits, what does Turkey set to gain from being in a strategic position on this energy corridor to Europe?
Since the setup of Bakü-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, Turkey opened a new chapter in its energy sector, playing a major role in transition of Caucasian and Central Asian energy resources to the European markets. So in that manner, Turkey has another factor in Turkish-European Union relations, while European Union tries to get rid of the dependency on Russian natural gas. So Turkey is in a very strategic location, which contributing to the goal of the European Union in the diversification of the energy resources and the decrease in the dependence on Russian gas. And moreover, with the recent pipelines like Turkstream and TANAP, Turkey puts another goal being an energy trade hub for the region mainly. So these pipelines play a major role in that manner.
Okay, we're going to get a little bit more into these topics a little bit later on, but I want to bring Matthew into the conversation. Matthew, these massive energy products, it's easy to see the benefits of it, but they also probably do come with some inherent geopolitical risks, don't they?
Yeah, well, this one in particular, because Turkey, throughout the time I've worked with Turkey, beginning in 1998, had a strong alignment with the United States and the rest of our NATO allies to do exactly the first part of what Filiz was saying, which is help Europe diversify its supplies of natural gas away from Russia. Well, this project brings a lot more Russian natural gas to Turkey. Some of that gas will be consumed in Turkey, but most will end up being consumed in EU markets. So the project will end up helping Russia strengthen its market share in Europe and help Russia be able to continue using energy as a political tool when it so desires.
And we're going to get into that. And Filiz, I want to turn back to you. How does the Turkstream project sort of change the dynamics of the existing pipe infrastructure network, both within Turkey and around Turkey? And how does it change the dynamics of some?
As mentioned by Mr. Braiza, it is very much after the sanctions imposed on Russia that this Turkstream project is offered to Turkey by Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. So it's a kind of attempt to derail the process that European Union tries to change the tendency from taking Russian gas into the markets by looking other alternatives. So in order to follow the similar tendency, Russia chose Turkey to take the Russian gas to Turkish territories, and from Turkey they want to continue to sell their natural gas to the European Union, but with the hands of the with the hands of the Turks. So it's a kind of alternative way to get rid of this diversification policy of the European Union, and also decrease in the dependency on Russian natural gas. And it is somehow can be attributed as it has both positive and negative dimensions for Turkey. It will increase the Turkish dependence on Russian gas, number one, but Russia also tries to keep Turkey in its own foreign policy to have more relations, so they would like to keep Turkey in their dimension to impose some kind of policies on Turkey.
So it's a multifaceted sort of project. It doesn't come with just one sort of one way. All right, Matthew, back to you. When you look at this pipeline, it bypasses Ukraine, and it comes at a time when ties between Turkey and Russia are deepening. It also comes at a time when the relations with what you were just mentioning between its allies on both sides of the Atlantic are fraying. Put this into perspective for us.
Well, let me provide this bit of perspective. I think probably Washington is thinking about applying sanctions to one half of the Turkstream project. There are two pipes that go under the Black Sea. The first one delivers gas to Turkey for its consumption internally. The second one, as we were saying, as Filiz was saying, delivers that gas to Europe. I think that second pipe has a chance of facing some sanctions from Washington, just as there's movement ahead in Washington to sanction a totally different pipeline, a Russian pipeline to Germany called Nord Stream. So that's going to create some serious tension, additional tension in U.S.-Turkey relations. But one bit of good news is that I think Washington has decided not to sanction that first pipe of Turkstream, because Washington realizes, Turkey needs more natural gas supplies. But the problem is that Turkstream is intended, as you said, to bypass Ukraine. It's intended, therefore, to squeeze Ukraine, to deny Ukraine revenues from gas transit that Russia had been paying. And I think we're going to see another gas war this winter when Russia cuts off all gas to Ukraine and will instead try to supply its customers in Europe using Turkstream.
So how does Turkey play its cards in these interesting times?
Turkey tries to keep ties with both sides simultaneously, which is not easy. So Turkey sees itself in the Western flank by membership, with the goal of membership to the European Union, and try to have better relations with Washington, despite the recent tensions between United States and Turkey. Moreover, Turkey has similar interests with regard to regional problems. Namely the Syrian situation. So Turkey tries to keep its relations with Russia in a very good way, because Turkey has a kind of Russian factor in its Syrian policy, which is vital. So Turkey does not have enough cards to get rid of Russian influence in its foreign policy.
Both of you were mentioning the two pipelines crossing the Black Sea, the second one providing energy resources to Europe. How do those countries feel with Turkey being a distributor or a transit country or an energy hub?
There is this debate in the literature whether this hub thing is a real thing or not, because in order to be a hub, lots of requirements are necessary. Whether Turkey meets those requirements or not, there's a big question mark. So instead of using the hub thing, Turkey tries to follow with the initial phase like energy trade hub instead of an energy hub dimension. So with regard to Caucasus countries, Turkey's option Turkey as an option is a favorite one. But with regard to Central Asian countries, because of the agreement signed with Russia, Russia tries to manipulate them. Instead of taking those gas through Turkey, Russia puts some kind of long-term agreements on the Central Asian gas things. That's why Turkey does not have that kind of good place in the Central Asian gas resources. But with regard to Caucasus resources, Azerbaijan and Turkish relations are increasing thanks to TANAP, thanks to other pipes.
Matt, one of the themes that you were saying is that Russia is using projects like Turkstream to sort of increase its influence in Europe's backyard, per se. How much of an instrument is natural gas used as a political instrument for Russia in this field?
It used to be a bigger political instrument than it is today. 15 years ago, 10 years ago, there weren't as many alternative supplies of gas into the rest of Europe. Today, we have liquid natural gas coming in from every corner of the earth. And we're in a period now when the European Union has invested in all sorts of other smaller pipelines to link various European countries. So if you have a gas shortage in country A, they can get the gas from country B. So it's a much better situation than it used to be. But 10 years ago, put it this way, I had one prime minister of a Central European country tell me, if they cut off the gas flow, if the Russians cut off the gas flow in winter, my political career is finished because I'll be blamed for people being cold, and some could freeze to death. They could die. So it used to be sometimes a very serious matter. Now,
Well, tell that to the Ukrainians then.
yeah, no, exactly. And so the Ukrainians have been working with the European Union, with us in the United States, to get different new supplies of natural gas. A year ago, they didn't import any gas from Russia, didn't need to. So the Ukrainians are positioning themselves to be able to get through this sort of a cutoff that is coming. In January of this year, I think there'll be no more gas flowing into Ukraine from Russia.
So what I have difficulty in understanding is that despite this sort of ongoing showdown between Russia and the West, you have gas shipments from Russia to countries like Turkey, to European countries, reaching an all-time high in the year 2018. Yet they decide to move forward with all these energy projects with Russia. They're okay with that. Isn't there a little bit of irony here?
Yeah, there's a lot of irony, yeah, and it's a strange situation where there is overabundance of natural gas in the market. I mean, it's a buyer's market right now. There really is no need for this additional infrastructure coming from Russia to Turkey or the EU, other than because Russia wants to squeeze Ukraine and cut Ukraine out of the deal. And so what you see happening is the West is acquiescing to this Russian policy of squeezing Ukraine using energy. And I think a lot of leaders in Europe are benefiting politically and economically, and I think sometimes personally.
On that note, unfortunately, we come to the end of it. We wish we had more time, but Filiz Katman and Matthew Briza, thank you very much for the conversation. I do appreciate it.
Thank you.
After a tense year of trade relations, among many other differences, the U.S. and Turkey now seem to be heading towards a more agreeable path. Less than a week after the U.S. cut by half tariffs on Turkish steel, Ankara has responded by reducing duties on 22 U.S. products destined for the Turkish market. But was it a truly reciprocal move? When the U.S. announced its tariff cut, it also removed Turkey from a favorable trade policy. Known as the General System of Preferences, or GSP for short, it was established in the mid-1970s to help developing nations boost their trade prospects. But now, the U.S. says Turkey's level of development renders its inclusion in the deal void. Despite Turkey's removal from the GSP, economic ties between Ankara and Washington do seem to be heading towards a more cooperative direction. Recently, Turkey reportedly closed its ports to Iranian oil, coming in line with the U.S.'s renewed push to isolate Tehran. Turkey's full compliance, despite initial misgivings, will allow it to avoid U.S. sanctions. And it was the very sanctions and tariffs that the U.S. just scaled back that sent relations between the two countries into a tailspin last year. The punitive measures were imposed on Turkey to force the release of an American pastor who had been detained on terrorism charges. So it's not just Turkey and the U.S. that have seen volatile trade relations this past year. Global trade wars are raging. To see where that leaves Turkey, I'm now joined by Bozkurt Aram, who's the director at the Economic Policy Research Foundation in Turkey, and he's also a former Turkish ambassador to Switzerland, and by Jian Gao, who is the Secretary General of the Shanghai Academy, a think tank and research institute based in China. Gentlemen, welcome to you. Good to have you on Straight Talk. Mr. Jian, let's start with you. Before we get into the specifics, let's talk about the bigger picture. With the U.S.'s withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a renegotiation of NAFTA, and then a looming trade war between the two of the world's largest economies. Are we seeing sort of a repositioning, a redefinition of a post-World War II trade era?
This is really a grand subject, actually. I agree it's a big picture because it's a possible trade war between the first economy power and the second economic power in the world so far. And however, I don't think it's a very clear shift from the post-war strategy, infrastructure of the world order into the possible new world order. Because actually China's side is very clear, by all means, in defense of the world order, as China benefit a lot, and as China is going to cater for the tendency of globalization, which determines the picture of the world order so far.
Okay. Ambassador, I want to get you in. When we talk about trade wars, obviously business is just one side of it. There are tariffs, there are restructuring of trade agreements. These all have a spillover effect. What do you think the repercussions are on global politics?
Well, let me start with the first question, I suppose, if you let me.
Okay, I'll give you a follow-up.
The system, the international liberal order, has been in place for 7 decades. And 12 U.S. presidents have been the champions of this system. And all of a sudden, with the administration Trump, it has started to change. Is it only because he has a different idea? Or is it because the whole system is, the globalization has come to its ends? That needs to be answered. It is, in my view, the technological rivalry that really imposes this kind of a rift between two major countries, China and United States. So this order will stay here, and would China be the champion of the existing system, or that yours is about to abandon? So that's the question. Well, for me, I think the existing technological drive of China is quite serious. They are quite important when it comes to artificial intelligence, computing, and autonomous cars. And so this rift would be would create an uncertainty that will stay for some time.
Because of the ongoing trade war between the United States and China, do you see other countries sort of picking up the slack? Do you see countries like Turkey maybe sort of stepping up and maybe filling in some voids created by this war?
Well, I mean, that's of course a small sidekick of the rift. I mean, when there is tariffs imposed on Chinese exports to United States, then of course Turkish investors, Turkish entrepreneurs could have a free way to go. But if the system collapses, if the system is under strain, then we all lose, including China, US, and all the countries involved. At this right moment, I feel three spheres: US, Europe, and China on one side. So the system will be defined again in coming days. And the old definition, let's say, the established order of 7 decades is under question at this time.
Mr. Jian, you said that China's position was clear with these three superpowers coming, at each other in terms of trade. Do you think that it needs to sort of maybe take a step back and reevaluate its position, its tactics, and how it approaches world trade?
I think national development is a very basic human right for any nation in this world. So this is our part of sovereignty for any nation in the world to develop itself economically, politically, and culturally. I want to say that you say there's a clear distinction between China and America. I would like to say there's a clear distinction between the past and the future. What I'm going to say is that, or you see, there's really a difference between China and America on a lot of subjects, like China in support of multilateral cooperation, America in support of unilateral cooperation. China call for deeper open policy, America call for a closed nation, build walls against Mexico's. So you can see that if there's a distinction, I would like to say it's not America versus China, but I would like to say the developed, or let's say America versus a kind of tendency in the world. For example, nearly more than 70% of the growth in the world economy is by the developing countries, not the developed countries. And half of the percent of their GDP is going to be made by the developing countries. So there's a growing tendency, which is obvious. So I like to say, if we have a kind of colliding sides, let's see, pro-historical tendency and anti-historical tendency. I would like to address it in this way.
Okay, now that we've solved this trade war between the United States and China, let's actually turn our attention to a developing country, Turkey. We've seen some interesting developments between Turkey and the United States recently. Last August, extra sanctions were put on by tariffs. In this past week, they've been taken off, reduced by half. But also, Turkey has been stripped of its preferential duty-free status with the United States. Talk to me about the timing and why you think it comes right now.
Well, I mean, if you look at the bigger picture, I mean, the way the United States is dealing with the WTO, they have submitted a paper a few months before this decision was taken. And in that paper, they claim that Turkey is a developed country. They said that Turkey has developed 25 times when it become part of the system. So these kind of extra benefit is not required by the Turkish economy. Okay. And the number is not that big. And so we should not be
But in terms of timing, do you find it any significance it coming right now, possibly right before the S-400 missiles defense system deal comes into effect in the coming months?
Well, I cannot say no. I mean, I suppose the country would use any kind of leverage they have towards the other country that wishes to bend to its needs, not the needs, the needs, I should say. I think it is a big probability.
Okay. Mr. Jian, you talked about... Go ahead.
If I'm going to bring the problem into a broader sense, I would like to say, talking about WTO, talking about globalization, it's not like a bilateral conflict. We'd like to look at it into the global perspective. Right. What I'm going to say is that we should call for inclusive, innovative globalization at the interest of all participants, instead of like one country's interest first, the other follow. This is very much unfair and unequal. This is old-fashioned, actually.
Okay, so in that global perspective, you talked about China's sort of multilateral approach in terms of trade. Talk to me about sort of the potential with countries like developing countries like Turkey, and a trade powerhouse like China.
would like to say I would like to say that trade problem or trade perspective is only part of the culture or the history of a certain nation. In talking about every culture, every country has its advantages as well as its disadvantages, has something good at and something not good at. So what we should do is that try to build up a multilateral cooperation platform so as to all the participants could make full use of their advantages in exchange for the goods for the better future in this nation.
Gentlemen, it seems that cooperation and multicultural approach to world trade seems to be the way to go. Mr. Jian Gao, Ambassador Aran, thank you very much for joining us here on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Janayandar. If you've got any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with the hashtag Straight Talk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.